All right, we're live. We have here Steve Chenault. Did I use
Chenault,
that?
yep.
Chenault.
Chenault,
And David, of course.
Hey,
Thanks for
folks.
joining us, David. And are you in Little Rock, Arkansas? Is that where you're at, Steve?
Normally I am in Little Rock, but we went up into the Ozarks, my wife and I, to watch the eclipse.
Oh, cool.
Sweet.
Did you have a clear skies for it?
We did. Well, we don't now, but it did yesterday. It cleared up for just a few hours before and a few hours after, and so we got to see everything. It was really cool.
Yeah, it's like magical when that thing goes to totality. I definitely recommend it for anyone who hasn't done that. I guess the next 21 years from now, but make your plans.
Mark your calendars.
Right. Yeah, it was. I was one of those that whatever, but it was cool. I got to say, and I didn't expect the sudden temperature drop. I mean, it was cool. I got to say.
Ross says hello. Hi, Ross.
How's it going, Ross?
There is actually another one in Egypt in like 4 years. That would be really cool. Be in an Egyptian temple, watch the eclipse.
That would be very cool.
Yeah,
I've heard there's people who do eclipse tourism. I guess they just follow the eclipses wherever they are, the cool ones.
Yeah.
It's an interesting hobby.
All right. Well, I got all sorts of questions. I'm sure Dave's got questions. We got some questions in the chat. We've got Malaki says hi. Hi, Malaki. And you guys are like the final. Let's start with the Kickstarter. So you guys are like in the final days of your Gary Gygax World Builders Kickstarter.
Yes.
Let me share that here. Let me present that tab.
I think we got like 30 hours or 32 hours or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Gary Gygax. There it is. Okay, yeah, 263,000 raised, over 1,000 backers, 26 hours to go. And hi, Chuck. Thanks for coordinating everything for us, Chuck. So did this surprise you? I mean, this is doing really good. You had a goal of 25,000. You got 263,000. I remember these books from, I think it was like early 2000s. Is that when the series came out?
The first one, the Canting Crew, we released in 2001, and I think the Cosmos Builder, which was the 7th, we did in 2007, and we were in the process of redoing the World Builder for a 3rd printing, the Canting Crew for a 2nd printing, and I can't remember which the 9th book was. It was probably Essential Places. Was in the offing to be done. So, we were in the process of redoing a bunch of them.
Very cool. So walk us through, what do these books have in them? What's like the content for them?
So what we have here on this Kickstarter is this series of books that Gary Gygax had envisioned. When we first signed with Gary, when we first started talking to Gary, this was the Canting Crew was what he talked about first. He really wanted this series of books out. And they essentially, I think that, he had done Dungeons & Dragons and Dangerous Journeys and Legendary Adventures. So he was kind of done doing adventures. What he really wanted to do in those days was create this body of work that both he wrote, but also that he edited and co-wrote and, just oversaw, I should say, that was how to play RPGs, build worlds, build games, design games, build adventures, run these things, play in them. He envisioned this wide encyclopedic set of resources for gamers, essentially what it was. And the Canting Crew is the first of those. And the Canting Crew takes you into the classes of the underclass, into a city, and it's thieves, it's rogues, it's assassins, it's beggars, all of those people who kind of live underneath the radar. He was fascinated with that stuff. He loved the Renaissance, and he did an epic amount of research into this book, putting together a cant dictionary, so a thieves dictionary. I can't remember how many words it in it, but it's got cant to English and English to cant. So you can actually walk away with this thing speaking cant, which is really cool.
That is cool.
It's amazing. And then he built all the guild structures for the beggars, all kinds of stuff like that. Very, very cool. And in the second one, the Essential Facts and Things, which we originally published as World Builder, was this gigantic dictionary-like, tome of just material, just what you would find in a dungeon, what you would find in a temple, what you would find in a palace, armor, weapons, types of horses, types of trees, types of gems, just all kinds of stuff to people, whatever it is that you're building. I mean, it was mostly just lists. We went back through and put in we defined some of the stuff because some of Gary's language was pretty esoteric. It was difficult, but know what he was talking about in some of these.
That's how we know it's Gary.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the high Gygaxian. So this was, I remember when I first started working on World Builder, my vocabulary went through the roof on this thing. You know, I just learned all kinds of words I never knew, which is really cool. The Living Fantasy was the third one, and that was actually, of the series, that was my favorite. When Gary basically said, in a fantasy world, what would a society look like? How would healing affect healthcare? You know, this type of stuff. So that one is, and it's the most readable. That one I absolutely loved. I'm a historian before all this, so it kind of hit that, you know, zone for me. Fourth book was the Extraordinary Book of Names, and it's more than just names. It's how to choose a name, what names mean. I can't remember off the top of my head when you have the first primary name and the secondary name. All of this stuff is explained. Then it goes into lists of names by culture. There's Egyptian, there's ancient Germanic, modern Germanic, there's Chinese, Polynesian. It's just a crazy amount of names in it. Fifth book was the how to write and or build an adventure. Fourth book was Nation Builder, and it was how to build a nation, you know, from its groundwork all the way up. And that was the sixth book, and the seventh book was Cosmos Builder, how to build a cosmology. And it wasn't really giving you one. It was saying, this is what you need, and this is how this should be built, and this is how this interacts with this. We've since, in the Kickstarter, unlocked 3 that were in the process of being published back in 2007 and 8. Essential Places was just unlocked, and that one is essentially, it takes, I think it's 24 different common places and gives you a really nice outline of what it looks like and how to build it. And then there's Pantheons, which is this dictionary of pantheons. It's going to be a fantastic resource for quick reference. And he wrote it with a fantasy world in mind, so it's not like 100% historically, mythologically accurate, you know, as we know the Norse or we know the Egyptian, but he wrote it so that it would fit into a fantasy environment. And then the last one is it was a project near and dear to his heart, the Wayland Smith catalog, which is this 200, but I don't care how many it is, which is this mountain of magical, I don't want to say joke magic items that can be both very deadly. Gary was a huge fan of puns and, you know, that type of stuff. So it's absolutely filled with that stuff. That's going to be the most interesting to actually delve into.
That's really cool. The Canting Crew, I remember the Gore the Rogue books. Those were just amazing books to read when I was younger. And yeah, he was all about the beggars and the undercity of Greyhawk, so that's cool. And then I had the Dangerous Journeys books, so his work on pantheons and world religions and stuff is just epic. So this looks really good, really good.
For me, this sort of book is kind of my favorite as a DM resource. You know, I got adventures covering shelves, and I've got rule books everywhere. But when I'm trying to be creative and come up with something to put in a dungeon or put in a town, there's the stuff that just comes to mind right off the bat. But then I can crack open a book like this. I've got a couple of the first editions on my shelves and dive into it and get all sorts of inspiration for things that I wouldn't have ordinarily thought of. And it just sets your imagination on fire. And things like the name book, the name's the hardest thing often to come up with. So to have a whole book of names, it's a really valuable resource that keeps your NPCs from being named Bob or Elmo and having your players making fun of your poor NPC Elmo through the entire course of the adventure. And I know that from experience. So I don't want that to happen to you.
It's funny you should say that, but actually this was years ago, but I don't know at what point Matt Golden, who's a good friend of mine, we were playing, and he said they go into a tavern and the tavern keeper's name's Otto, and he's like, dude, are there any tavern keepers not named Otto in your world? I didn't even realize I was doing it over and over again. It's a franchise, I guess. I don't know. But
so that looks like a really good product. Another one you guys got coming soon is the Castle Zagig product. Tell us about that one.
So Castle Zagig was Gary's I hate to use this word magnum opus, but that's what we always think of when we think of Gary, because this was his thing. He actually was interested in Castle Zagging, but he was far more interested in Yigsburg, the city that was near Castle Zagging, than he was the castle and the dungeon. But this is, I guess Gary started running Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s or 60s or whenever he began it, and he started running them through this dungeon that eventually became Castle Greyhawk, the Castle Greyhawk dungeons, and obviously he lost Greyhawk to Wizards of the Coast or whosoever. So he changed it to Castle Zagging. So this is his gigantic dungeon, and it's more than that. It consists of there's the city of Yigsburg, and near the city of Yigsburg sits inside the East Mark, and the East Mark is about 20 square miles of area, and the Castle Zagging is this castle of a mad archmage who lives on a bluff kind of overlooking the East Mark. And in that bluff, you've got the castle itself, and there's 3 levels to the castle. Then there's the walls, that's called the precincts. The Mouths of Madness are these caves of madness, chaos that are inside the berm that the castle sits on. And then beneath all of that are 18 levels of a dungeon that is Gary's conception of what this mad mage had created. So it is a monstrous... I don't even like to think of it as, we call them mega dungeons now. I don't really like to think of it like that, because it's really I don't know, it's its own ecosphere or something. It just feels different with the castle there. It's not just something you go into. There's a whole history here. And the city, of course, gives it this very lively and living environment. And in Yigsburg itself, we were in the process of publishing 26 different books on all of these things, all of the neighborhoods inside the city. So it's this absolutely huge setting project that has this very, very deep dungeon and haunted castle on the edge of it.
How closely does this stick to Gary's original D&D campaign? Is it a more modern creation, or is it him trying to recreate the original, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, that's a great question, because he played this forever and a day. And like any of us who have DM'd any games or CK'd any games, you make notes, and that note is frequently 10% of what you've envisioned there, right? I mean, there's so much more that you're going to go into, and so much more that the players, they push against, or, force you to make up this because they went there, or, whatever craziness goes on. So when we first started working on this back in 2003, 2004, he envisioned taking his notes, which he has in the binder, and expanding on those and making this a really living dungeon. That was his purpose. He didn't want it to just be this kind of thing that we would have seen back in the 1970s. That's just some graph paper, sketched or whatever, and random notes. He wanted the whole thing to be as if this mage created it, and it was a functional environment within which to live. And he and Peter Bradley, Jeffrey Talanian was doing the writing, but Peter Bradley, our art director, was doing the mapping of the dungeon. I think they got the first 4 levels done. And it expanded it into things that Gary wanted, that he felt that level, the first level is called the storerooms. So the storerooms needed to have a lot of stuff in it, enough storerooms, enough capacity to feed the entire castle when it was an actual castle, right? So it is definitely what he envisioned it as, but it's expanded to make it into something that he wanted it to be, which is a really living, a real environment, and not just kind of a, B2 is a fantastic adventure, but it's just cookie cutter. Here's the dungeon and go. He didn't want that. I remember very specifically, he was adamant about the levels being interconnected with ramps and staircases and secret passages and shafts from here to there. He wanted that stuff so that it had that feeling of depth to it that you would find if you went to any castle in Europe.
Well, that's very much in the spirit of the original D&D, with dungeons being restocked and corridors being changed to keep things fresh.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons, and he insisted, and it was one of the original reasons we created Castles and Crusades. There were several of it, but he loved Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, 3rd edition, I think we were on 33.5 at this point. I think that's where the market was. And 3rd edition is a fine game. He liked it. I like it, what have you. But he wanted something that was very near to AD&D. And I'm an old AD&D hound. So, and to this day, if I'm not playing Castles and Crusades, I'm playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It was a game I found that had, and the other games are cool, but they restrict me too much as a CK, or they restrict the players, which is even worse. And AD&D didn't. So it had this. For those of you who have played it, it has this feel to it of just, I don't know, it's raw, I guess. I don't know what the right word is, but he wanted that same kind of feel to it, and that's one reason. And while we were developing Castles and Crusades, we ran the rules by him. Now he didn't write any of them, but he would read them and say, "Okay, yeah, this works. Nah, this isn't going to work." So we would shift back to make it a little bit more like the original, and that's why CNC for people like myself is really a nice game to go to from AD&D.
So I can go down the whole train of thought on Castles and Crusades. I want to hit that up. But first, before we leave Castle Zagging, so a lot of the neat part of the first AD&D stuff was how he would mention little bits of it in like the Dungeon Master's Guide. He'd talk about, the Isle of the Ape and stuff like that, and how they went through a portal here or a portal there, how they went to China, the other side of the world, and had to fight their way back home. Are those like little mystery portals and stuff going to make their appearance down there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's all kinds, because he's the Mad Mage, right? So it's got all kinds of stuff. And one of the projects that he loved the most, and he didn't really like writing adventures when we were working together, was Hall of Many Pains. And Hall of Many Pains is that. It's this gigantic tower that's just got these window panes in it, and you step into these other worlds. Some of them real world, some of them not. Yeah, he absolutely loved that. So we will definitely have that stuff in there, without a doubt.
That's great. And you got some contributors. Luke Gygax, the late James Ward, Jason Vey, Jeremy Farkas, Davis Chenault.
Michael Stewart will be heading up the writing. Talking to him very recently about that. Michael, he's been in and out of the industry for years. He is a fantastic writer, and he's got, for my money, of all the writers out there that I'm familiar with, he captures the AD&D spirit almost perfectly. We've got a couple of his adventures, Shadows of the Halfling Hall and Virulent Rage. And Shadows of the Halfling Hall, when I play that, it's the only adventure I've run for CNC that my veteran, we have been playing at the same table since 1984, and that about maybe 3/4 of the way through, 80% of the way through, Mac was like, "All right, we're just leaving it. There's so many traps and stuff. we're going to leave. This isn't worth it. Whatever is at the end of this is not worth, the mayhem that's being caused to our characters." And I thought that's the most AD&D thing anyone has ever said. It's hard to explain to people without it, and you guys know, but without it sounding like we're bragging or whatever. But AD&D was a different game, and death it's pretty common.
Yeah, it was a great game. I mean, I started playing when I was 9, started playing with the Holmes edition, and then went to AD&D from there. And it was just so magical. The writing was so adult, so grown up, and it did treat me like a kid. And I could just, sink my teeth into it. There's so much to explore. And the World of Greyhawk was just amazing, obviously.
Yeah.
And then, the adventures just trickled out. We are so amazed. We have like this cornucopia of access to the history of the adventures that are coming and what's coming soon. And we get, tweets and YouTube videos and everything. For me, it was go down to the game store and maybe I could spend my allowance on the next adventure coming out and then play that. Don't know what's coming out in 10 months or 3 months or 4 months. I had no idea. It was just it was a magical time. I really did like it.
You really didn't even know what you were buying. I mean, it was it had 2 lines on the back, and that's what you got.
And you had to scrounge for stuff too, because there wasn't a whole lot of adventures out. You had to make your own, scrounge for things, run. What did we run? Roll Aids, I think, had like a series of adventures. Ran some of them. Yeah. In
the early days, We Warriors put out some really cool, wild stuff. I mean, there was some crazy stuff in those days. But so Michael will be heading up the writing, and Jeremy and Jason will be assisting in Davis as well. And obviously Luke Gygax, Jim Ward, and Luke Gygax and Jim Ward were our major. I participated in this, advisors. And of course, Jim Ward has passed away. God rest him. But so Luke will be taking on that role. He'll have a heavier role than he anticipated, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so let's talk about Castles and Crusades. Right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like off and on, you make the actual Player's Handbook available for download for free. I don't know if it is right now, but sometimes it is.
It's always for free. You can go to the store
Okay.
right now and download it. I think it's the 7th printing of it.
And I love these covers. You know, the throwbacks to the
Yes.
Advanced Dungeons and Dragons covers. The content of these books is really well done. I just purchased the Castle Keeper's Guide, and I'd recommend that for people running any campaign. You know, it doesn't have to be AD&D or Castles and Crusades, because the content in here is just really top notch, I thought.
Well, thank you. It's really just a GM's tool. It's kind of what it's designed.
Yeah. So how did Castles and Crusades come about? When did that start?
So when we were doing D20, when we started, we published a small game called Swords and Sorcery, and it was in the back of the adventures that we published. There was 3 adventures in one world book, and so D20 comes out. We release at 2000 and Gen Con 2000. We released at that convention, and we knew D20 was coming. So Swords and Sorcery is a little bit like the 3rd edition. Mac, who designed it, did that very purposely so the adventures could kind of line up with 3rd edition. So we very quickly got picked up by AC Distribution and then a whole bunch of distributors after that, and we began publishing D20 material. Now I was never a huge fan of 3rd edition. It's a great game, but it's not quite my cup of tea. I felt the combat was too complicated, and I run very fast and very violent combat sessions, so it just slowed that down. So I never really shifted to 3rd edition. I kept playing AD&D even while we were selling it. And this is a problem. Obviously, you want, your front guy to be, doing what you're selling, right?
Yeah.
I sell a Chevy, but I drive a Ford or whatever. That's not really what you. It's not the best thing. So that was kind of always percolating in there. And Mac and Davis, my brother, the co-founders of Troller Games, were myself, Matt Golan and Davis Chenault. They love game design, and they had been tinkering with Swords and Sorcery ever since. And both of them kind of stepped out of the company early on, and I kept with it, selling Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition. So in about 2003 or 4, give or take, Gary, he's pitching Castle Zagging to me, and he's like, but this can't come out as 3rd edition. You level up too fast in 3rd edition, so we can't do this. It's got to be something AD&D. And I first suggested that he just put together a quick 2-page rule set and put it in the back of Castle Zagging and go that way. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted it to have a game that supports it. He was a firm believer that role-playing games can only survive if they have continual releases with them. And just, single launching an adventure out into the ether is not going to be conducive to anything. So he wanted a game. So we kind of I sat down with Mac and Davis in 2003, I guess, and we took this idea. Gary needed this. I needed a game. Troller Games needed a game that I could stand behind, and Davis and Mac wanted a game. So we began talking about it. And about that time, a good friend of mine, John Nephew from Atlas Games, we were at GTS out in the Game and Trade Show, which is a trade show for RPG game manufacturers, whatever. And John came up to me while I was eating dinner with Aldo Giazzi and said, we talked for a minute. He goes, so what is your plan for the bubble? Well, I come from a history background. I was working on my PhD in history when I started this. I didn't know what he was talking about, economic this, trend, that, whatever. And he explains to me that we're in a huge bubble. The D20 bubble is fixing to burst, and everybody that's just selling D20 is just going to get annihilated. And I was like, well, John is insanely smart, so I should probably listen to what John is saying. So I went back to Mac and Davis, and I said, let's do it. Let's make this game. And they designed it. I wrote sections of it. Any section that says don't use the rules, I wrote that. If it's got rules in it, it's Davis and Mac. So they designed it, and it took us about a year. We play tested online. And I think August 2004, we released the white box set, which is kind of a preamble to the game itself. At Gen Con, it sold crazy well. And then in December of that year, December of 2004, we released the Player's Handbook. And it came out. And it sold very well from the outset, as I think the D20 market had collapsed. The bubble had exploded. People were looking for something different. So we just landed at the right time, I think. We predated any of the OSR games. There was nothing like that out there when we first released CNC. But the 3 driving forces were my need to sell something that I wanted to play, Gary Gygax and Davis and Mac's desire to make a game.
So has it been through any major revisions since first release? Not
really. I would say there's been 3 waves of changes. The first wave was from the 3rd to the 4th printing, but it might be the 4th to the 5th printing. I'm not sure. And the only thing that was changed, I think it's 3rd to 4th. I think the only thing that changed, we added 48 new spells that Jim Ward had written for us. We gave the illusionist the ability to heal. And we changed the names of the monks' abilities to move it away from the Asian kind of approach and just make it more of a pugilist type of thing, so that people would feel comfortable with that. And then I rewrote the barbarian. I gave the barbarian abilities more primeval. I made it more primeval than kind of game mechanics wise. So the changes were all minuscule, mostly just nomenclature, and the thing that caused the most uproar was giving the illusionist the healing ability. People did not like that they could heal with illusionist spells. That did not go over well with some people.
They have something against the placebo effect.
Yeah. It's funny, and that comes directly from Davis. He played this. So I've never encouraged clerics to only be healing clerics, right, at my table, which is very aggravating to everyone else at the table because you can't get heals. And when the games are, violent, whatnot, it makes it worse. And Davis made this cleric. He played his cleric from 1st to 3rd level. He kept his mouth sewn shut so he could, as payment to his god for his powers, so he could only cast spells that were, with hand gestures or holy symbols, which is mostly he can't do anything. And everyone is so angry at him. I thought, we got to do something else for healing at this table. This is nuts. So that's kind of where the illusionist thing came from. Mark Sandy wrote us those rules for that.
What fascinated me about Castles and Crusades since the white box came out is it's in a way a very traditional game and a nod to the traditional style of play in AD&D. But also where most of the games trying to capture that play were retro clones, trying to just restate the old rules. Castles and Crusades adopted some newfangled innovations like ascending armor class and cyclical initiative and whatnot. Can you take us behind some of the thinking that led it to be led it to combine that traditional with some of the more modern innovations?
Yeah, that's directly Mac and Davis in their design process, because we all had played AD&D forever. Now Davis played many different types of role-playing games. He loved to experiment. Mac did a little bit, but Mac usually sat at my table when we were kids, back in the 80s and 90s, and we played AD&D. And there were some problems that we had to fix, as we all did. There's directions you took your game that you had to fix it. And so things like the ascending, when they were designing it, things like the ascending armor class just makes sense, right? It really does. I love the old negative stuff, but if you were to ask me, I never memorized any of it. I had to use the charts, and I've ran the AD&D for 25 years or whatever. I didn't memorize any of that mess. It didn't make any sense to me. I just did what the chart told me to do, right? And Mac wanted, one of the things, he tells us better than I do, but I used to do when I was running AD&D, because there was no real attribute check system, or no system to check anything before the Dungeoneer Survival Guide and the Wilderness Survival Guide. And even that, it was very limited. I would have them, like, if you want to swim a river, I would look to my pile of dice, and whatever dice I saw first, I would say, roll a D8. So, and it was completely random. And in my head, I'd go, okay, 5 and above, they make it, 1 to 4, they drown. And Mac hated that. He absolutely hated that, because it gave him no chance, to figure out, to play the odds or whatever. So he wanted to make that all streamlined, and that's where the Siege Engine comes from. He sat down and developed this. He and Davis did develop this Siege Engine check, because they wanted it to make logical sense for the players and logical sense for the CK. And at the same time, it had to be very fast paced, like AD&D was. And that was the joy of AD&D, is it was very fast paced. You didn't have to ask questions. This is the way it works. Just go. But in an environment that gets ever more complicated with spells and, combat maneuvers or whatever, that becomes more and more that side of things to the table. And I think he did. I think with the Siege Engine, I was a reluctant convert to CNC. We published in 2004. I didn't run my first CNC game until 2006. I knew how the game ran, but I was happy with AD&D. So I just kept playing AD&D. But when I ran my first game and started using the Siege engine, I changed everything because now it unshackled my hands as a CK. I had an immediate mechanic to give anyone that was trying to do anything. And they had some kind of parameters to put that in. And we didn't have to go look anything up, right? You just, here's roll, make your attribute check. And we stress, we have a chart in there that says, poison is a constitution save, whatever is a dexterity save. You don't have to follow that. You can do whatever you want. And that fits my gaming style because sometimes I'll have them make a dex check to cross a river, but I might have the wizard make an intelligence check because I want it to be dangerous, but I want them to have a better chance. And I don't have to justify it. It's just an attribute check. They don't even need to ask, and you don't need to explain. So it has that kind of loose feel that AD&D has, yet it's got where third edition's real strength was giving some order to what's going on at the table, right? So it's got the best of both worlds. I feel. I think CNC, and I don't like to shamelessly plug, but I think it's probably one of the best, if not the best, games out there for people who like to run their own tables, and shift and go. I guess I should plug CNC, but there's lots of good games out there. But CNC really, if you like to kind of manage what's going on at the table, it gives you all of it.
Tom, you're muted if you're talking.
Question from the chat. Thanks, David.
No.
Asking if Jim's passing was having an impact on the production of Castle Zaggy. So they were contributors, you said, and advisors.
Yes.
Tell us about, what did you guys share with Jim before he passed away with regard to how was it for him playing in Castle Greyhawk?
So Jim, first I want to say Jim is probably the most pleasant person that I've ever worked with. He was just a pure, and Gary was a great person working, but Jim was just pure joy. He was insanely nice, crazy polite, always on time. We got along really well. There was he didn't bring any, whatever. He just worked, which is wonderful. And coupled with, he's a great game designer. I still say that the Starship Warden is one of the coolest settings that has ever been put to paper. I mean, the concept behind the Starship Warden is just badass. And we worked on many projects with Jim. He wrote the Storyteller's Thesaurus for us, worked on the Storyteller's Dictionary. He was a co-author on that. He wrote Of Gods and Monsters for us, one of our earliest CNC expansion books. He wrote the spells, a good chunk of the spells in the Player's Handbook. His hand was on multiple products that TLG did. I love working with Jim. We have 3 unpublished products of his that he had done, and they were just in the queue that we were sitting on. So Jim, I don't like to put words in people's mouths, but I know Jim played in Greyhawk. I know he talked to Gary a lot about it, but more importantly, he sat with Gary. He worked with Gary for many years, so he kind of knew the direction Gary took things and wanted to take things. So that was always a huge advantage. And he had worked and written a version of Castle Zagyg at some point that was never published. So he had access to a lot of Gary's notes after Gary had passed away. So there was I cannot stress what we lost. Forget, my personal feelings, but on the professional side, what we lost when he passed away a few weeks ago, because he had it's probably the last one with that amount of knowledge and that ability to put that knowledge to work, in a digestible format of anyone except Luke and probably Ernie Gygax. I mean, it's a shame. He had sent me, we were in the process of talking. I was actually just asked him to write all the forwards for the World Builder archives when he passed away. And we were in the process of getting the whole Castle Zagyg project set up so he had sent me this really cool map. I didn't even know, I described the dungeons earlier, but Gary had designed a second and a third dungeons that are near the main Castle Zagyg, and one's kind of elven based and one's kind of dwarven based, but that's all I've got. I mean, I don't have anything else, so I'm not sure what Jim had on target with that.
So you got this Kickstarter getting ready to wrap up tomorrow, and then you got those 10 books to come out, and then Castle Zagyg coming out, and then what's 5 to 10 years down the road for you guys?
Good Lord. So
is it all that work still?
Yeah.
Like Castle Zagging still?
we do hope, but my plan is to move on Castle Zagging quickly. I don't want this sitting around as a 10-year project, a 5-year project. I hope that writing begins on level 2 next month, and that in 17 months we're done with it. Because I want 1 level a month done, and Mike is the guy to do that. I mean, he can stay on target. I'm not worried about that. That way, it's written and it's done, and we can say, here is Gary's, Castle Zagging that we've all wanted, as close as we're ever going to get, right? So that the next 2 years will be caught up in doing that. We're fixing to pull the OGL. We're in the process of pulling the OGL out of Castles and Crusades entirely. So by summer months, that will be our big push coming in the next few weeks. Is the cleansed CNC material, which is just
exercised.
Yes, and, whatever Wizards of the Coast is doing, God bless them. Good luck, whatever. Just that announcement they made last January that they were yanking the OGL it caused so much disruption in our schedule that we're out. We're done. So lots of CNC, but we've got the Codex of the Plains. I'm super excited about. That's a huge exploration of the plains. CNC is desperately in need of that because we've been around so long that we've got a lot of high-level players out there. And, you start traveling the plains, so you need some information. I'm writing that one, very, very interested in it. One of the things I'm trying to do is create stat blocks in there so that the CK, the GM, can go in and just read really quickly what happens on this plains, and you don't have to read all 7-8 pages of it, right?
Yeah.
Because you know how it is when your players plane travel, they just pick some random plane and you don't have time to stop and read 8 pages of stuff. So that's my plan there. Beyond that, we've got Davis's World of Inzaya that we're going to explore, which is kind of the counterpart to the World of Air. Very excited about that. And some other projects I can't really talk about at the moment. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to do an announcement on it. We've got an exciting next 3 or 4 years laid out, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I just saw a suggestion of TrollCon.
Yes. So we did back in the day, a few years ago, we did 4 or maybe 5 TrollCons in Little Rock, Arkansas. And Chuck has been working to get another one going. And the reason I can't remember, Davis didn't want to do them in numerical order. So we did like TrollCon 1, then TrollCon 9, then there's TrollCon 14. It's just very confusing. So we just had them all over the place. So whatever TrollCon we're on, we're looking at a September convention of it. And I'm pretty excited about it. The TrollCons are really fun. And I always seem to be going to cons that are like 16 hours away. It'd be nice to have one that's not
one in your backyard.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a short drive for me. That's like 8-hour drive, I think. So I'd be able to make that one. That'd be fun.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yep.
Much easier.
All right. So what conventions do you guys normally attend, or are you planning this year?
So we used to go to just a mountain of conventions. I think Davis and Mark hit one every 3 or 2 weeks for like 2 years. And I would hit about one every 4 or 5 months. And we did that for several years. In 2017, we backed off the convention schedule and zeroed in on Gary Con, and Gamehole Con was about it. But this year we're gearing that back up. We've been to DICON in St. Louis, Gary Con. We're going to be at Gamehole. We're going to be at Gen Con. I can't honestly remember the name of the Pennsylvania convention. What is that, Chuck? I know you're out there. We're going to one in Pennsylvania in January, TrollCon in September. So we are ratcheting back up our convention schedule. It'll be nice. We've got a slightly bigger crew now, so we can kind of push out a little bit.
Do you guys have a booth in Gen Con in the dealer hall?
We do. We've got a booth set up, and Chuck is in the process of getting us games and tables running. So if you're at Gen Con and interested in running some CNC, reach out to Chuck.
Very good. Yeah, that dealer hall there at Gen Con is amazing.
It is amazing. I miss it. I think 2017 was the last time I went, and we did 17, 18 years in a row. And I miss that. There's just this, I don't know, this energy about Gen Con that's nowhere else.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Dave, you have more questions?
Well, I was curious. Troll Lord started as a publisher for a couple of your campaign worlds, right?
When we first did it, Mac Golden he created this zine called The Seeker, and he was just handing it. He and I went to Dragon Con every year, He and some buddies of ours, and we would just hand that out. He had this cool little zine called The Secret. I think he did like 12 issues or something. And at the time, I was writing adventures and submitting them to TSR to get published. I've actually got one of them that was rejected and notes on it by Roger Moore. It's really kind of cool.
Nice.
He made some really nice comments. It was really cool. So Mac posed to me in '99. He said, "Hey, why don't we, instead of going to Dragon Con, let's go to Gen Con and let's publish some books just to cover our costs." Now, that's how he got me doing it. His whole thing was, let's start a game company. That's what he wanted to do. But he knew that I was cheap, so the only way to get me to go to Gen Con was to somehow cover the cost, right? So we wrote 2 adventures, and Davis kind of joined us in the mix, wrote a 3rd one. And when we sent them to the printer, the guy said, if you have, because they did offset printing, and it's something the way they lay their sheets out, he said, if you do a 4th book this same size, we can give you a pretty hefty discount. So we didn't have anything else, so I sat down and I've got this giant gray binder that's my world that I've been playing in forever and a day, running them since the 80s. And Max said, why don't you take that, condense it all down and get us a playable world? So I wrote this 24-page book called The After Winter Dark campaign setting, and it's the world of Aird, and that has since been probably it's our longest published product that has stayed continually in publication, and one of our bestsellers. It is definitely an evergreen in the Trolldom. But yeah, so that's sort of how it started. These adventures in this world setting, and then it picked off. It's very interesting. We really didn't see it coming. I mean, I remember we were selling books in ACD. James Mishler, a good friend of mine, he was a buyer at ACD Distribution, then came up to the booth, looked at everything, and he bought, I want to say, 62 copies of everything, which that's pretty good for out the gate for one distributor. And suddenly we suddenly had a company. We had to do something with it.
Well, I think you're selling yourself short, because it's 25 years later, and after that modest start, you're still going strong, despite the popping of the D20 bubble and all the other churn that's happened in the hobby. It's an extraordinary accomplishment and journey that you've been behind.
Well, thank you. And it has been 25 years, and I'm going to borrow that word if I can. Churn in the hobby. I love it, because that's the perfect description of what's happened over the past 25 years.
I got one more quick one. You guys just did a Kickstarter for The Hermit. Gary Gygax is The Hermit.
Yes.
And I noticed you have a Shadow Dark version of it as well.
Yes. So Shadow Dark, these guys are fantastic over there. It's Kelsey, right? Is that who's running that
Kelsey.
show? Yeah, just great people, and the game is really, really cool, and it kind of harkens back. I think someone told me it merges AD&D and 5th edition. I think that's what someone said. I can't remember exactly now, but it just seemed a natural fit. So we reached out to them and asked them if they wanted to do a version of this, and they were super excited about it. So there will be a PDF version of The Hermit that comes out in the Shadow Dark, game. Shadow Dark game. And The Hermit is one of the coolest adventures I have ever run and read. It is just, I'm not going to say much about it because it gives spoilers away, but it starts off so normal, and by the end of it, you're going, what what is going on here? Yeah. So it's very AD&D about it.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, it's great to see people in the industry lifting each other up. You guys working with Kelsey working with you guys. That's cool.
They're great people over there. Frog God, good men. We're all good friends, and we all try to help each other out. And some of us have been around for a long time. Frog God's been around as long as TLG. So
yeah, there is. I don't think there's a connection here, but maybe there might be. So in Lost Cabins of Sojkamp, there's a hermit that's got psionic powers. Is that in any way related to this hermit?
I don't think so.
Don't think so. Okay.
Yeah, this is a. He doesn't know, because I don't want to give too much away, but no, it's okay. it's an interesting adventure.
Yeah,
very classic, but not at the same time.
Yeah,
I do want to say, Dave, thank you for that. Was a very nice compliment about the 25 years. It has been a struggle. It's been a joy, but we have managed with some great people, managed to keep it going, which is good, and all of the people out there.
Yeah, Steve, thanks so much for coming on. You guys got a great product. I love that GM book I just bought. I'll be buying more. And definitely can't wait to see the Castle Zagic stuff.
It's going to be awesome. Well, thank you for having me on.
All right.